Hey everybody, welcome to the Sunday Live Chat. I'm here again with you on furthering the series of the story of our albums. And one of my very favorite albums indeed of probably our career is an album known as Too Dark Park. Um, God, it's something. It's funny how it cancels it out. Burp, burp. Well, anyways, I'm holding the same cover. You can see that. Oh, there you go. Too Dark Park vinyl. I believe this is the original OG copy, and unopened at that. That's one thing you have to do is keep copies of your records in your collection so that you have them later. But I'm going to be talking about the story of this album and no. Oh, well, if it is, Rihanna just sent me a note. Okay, that this is public. I have no idea why this is going public, but if it is, welcome public. Usually it's private in Patreon world, and I thank you Patreon subscribers. But today, apparently, we're also going public as well. So this will be interesting to see how many people show up. So yeah, let's start the story of Too Dark Park, where we last left off in the last episode, you might want to call it. We're talking about rabies, and we were talking about how the band was kind of like headed towards disintegration. I think it was really the meeting of Al Jorgensen and Skinny Puppy that was a vibrant meeting, and I don't think there was anything all that wrong with it. And despite all the people in the press that have all, there's so many writings that say people were displeased and all that sort of thing, and I think like it was a lot more casual than that. We had a great time making Rabies, and for us it was a bit different of an album, but it wasn't as different as we didn't think it was as different as everybody else thought. There were songs on it that were still like pure Skinny Puppy, I thought. And so what was great is that there was an influence, that we were cross-pollinizing each other sort of in a weird way. But it kind of like allowed Ogre to go out on tour with Ministry and be part of that world. And then as well gave us a chance, Dwayne and I, to do 3 albums back to back. More or less solo albums, Cyberactive, Doubting Thomas, The Infidel, and Hilt, Call the Ambulance. And so by the time we were sort of like framing our minds up to thinking about Skinny Puppy, we were approaching really the idea of I guess how we would go about it, and we just naturally sort of approach that thing. But one thing that I find to be quite prominent in the history of Skinny Puppy, in the sense of where we're at this time, is that I had just gone to Jamaica, and I was celebrating my birthday, and basically the idea was I don't know why I always had this idea that I had to quit smoking pot, because basically up to this point, that's really the only drug or whatever, I don't even like to call it a drug, the only stimulant that I really found that we're using all the time. And I thought, like, well, what would it be like with life without pot? And so when I came back from Jamaica, which, by the way, Jamaica is a great place to go smoke your final joints for your birthday, the whole place. And so the music was also getting inside me. So there was like this weird thing about, Jamaica and like the vibe and the music and the settings and stuff like that. And then my birthday, I was saying, okay, when I go back home, this will be it. I'll go back and I'll see what it's like for a while. So I head back, and at this moment, we had moved the studio setup over to Dwayne's place. And Dwayne's place at that point, we're talking the Nelson Street apartment. So if you look on the locations thing that we've been going by in this series, that's It would be between these two places here down on the bottom. Dwayne's place was the balcony right above the entrance of the door here, so it would have been in this room here, and on the back side of this building right about there. So this was on 1455 Robson, and I believe this is 1869 Nelson Street. And so I would go over to 1869 Nelson Street and go in there, and Dwayne had a nice setup in there. All our gear. It's kind of like what you've seen in the previous photos. The gear consisted, the studio was sort of like an amalgamation of everything that we had. And so it was based a lot on samplers at this point still. And in reality, I think like no more of our albums took more of a center focus in sampling, I think, than, I mean, I would say Vivisect, but also Two Dark Park is a heavily sampling based album, like getting into the wonder of sampling. And a large part of it I got from this radio. And I would just sit in front of the Emacs and basically like assign a few keys, like say 3 keys to one sample, and basically work my way up. And by the end, I would have a lot of distorted sounds and a lot of really cool, like, I'll give you a demonstration here today. So as well, this is sort of jumping ahead a little bit here, but as we got into live, I started actually playing with this unit, which was a custom built 4 radio unit, which was triggered by drums in the setup, in my live setup. And so there was always an interest in radios, and stations particularly tuned in say particular cities where we visited could be something recognizable to people. And so that concept had been playing along for years within my brain, and always played a live part in our stage setup. Of course, the Atari 1040, still our main sequencer, with the Steinberg Pro 24 version 3, pretty rock solid in the sense that we composed every song that we made for Skinny Puppy all the way to the end of the process, utilizing this computer and that software. I pointed out these pieces of gear before, but it's important to point out that this was the staple of Skinny Puppy's sound. The Ibanez delay, another Ibanez delay, the PCM 41, the S900 was the framework of 100% of all the drums on Two Dark Park that were basically sequenced. There's a number of songs on Two Dark Park that have live played drums, which I'll go into that detail. But generally, most of the samples that we were collecting as for drum sounds and pertinent to this album, the S900 is the golden child, really. This is the MCI console from Vancouver Studios. We recorded the album in Mushroom Studios in Vancouver. We utilized all this gear. Essentially, yes, the Pro 1, very important, always. I should say, though, that this album, Two Dark Park, the Pro 1 took a short vacation or something in this album because, there's not a lot of Pro 1 songs based, or is there sort of like the architecture of how we used to trigger samples from this guy, the SDD 1000, from our drum machines. And we still use the Mirages heavily in Two Dark Park. Something about the whole way, the 8-bit, crushed 8-bit, Curtis filters, everything to do with the Emaxes and the Mirage sound. It's very attractive. The only problem with these keyboards is they're now old, and so they don't function as nicely as they did when they were brand new. And that with this was our first Emax, and we had this one and the second one. And so what we would do is do the same. This one would have a better part of like what would be more musical samples or more noise on. More noise would be on one and more music would be on the other. So basically, if there was a sequence that was created using noise samples, and we wanted to make a bass line. Then basically the bass line was either coming from the ESQ or the Emax, the other Emax that would be free. The ESQ one, surprisingly enough, I went back and I was looking to see what the bass sound was in Tormentor, because I thought, like, man, that has to be the most wicked bass sound. And I couldn't remember if that was a sample from the Emax or if that was a keyboard. And it turns out it's the ESQ. So big up to the ESQ. If you think that it can't kill it on the bass world as well as those wacky FM detuned goodness, I mean, there's just something to be said about it. Yeah. So that's a better part of the gear we were using. Someone has asked a question of whether we had the SY77 or the SY22 yet, and I do not believe we did yet. I believe that is to come on Last Rites. So that was kind of like a true kind of like Dwayne addition to the band, and an essential component of the sound of what would flesh out the further sort of FM synthesis that came along later. But nevertheless, as I was saying, this album was recorded in Mushroom Studios, which at the time has not, I hate how they shrink these pictures, was not very technical. So basically it had a bunch of EQs, compression, and basically I think there was a Lexicon primetime digital delay up there that we utilized. And this is a later picture of the rack back there, so it actually has different gear, but there was a lot of like green Furman EQs, they were called, and tape machines. Back here was also the tape machines. We recorded everything for Too Dark Park on the 2-inch tape using Studer 2-inch tape and through the Studer machines, and the console was the custom Charlie Richmond sound design console, basically hand built by Charlie, because I don't believe that's the Richmond sound design board. If it is, it is. If not, this is the same room. It had this fantastic wood, sort of inlaid wood finish on the walls, and sort of like a floor that had been raised, and underneath it there was I believe there was an 18-inch sub underneath the floor, and up in these things here was Uri 813s, I believe, and then we did a lot of monitoring on the NS10s, which the world's worst speakers, but we still monitored to make sure we weren't going to blow out people's systems at home. And many people would say that Too Dark Park had a great opportunity to do so. The Sonics is something that people always talk about. If you would talk about like reviews or sort of media about the whole sort of like sound, it'll be like, oh, this is just sonic terrorism, or this is like some sort of like deviant thing. And in actuality, it was like just really making music out of forms of noise. And I'm gonna, as I said, I'll go into detail with that. The name Too Dark Park obviously comes from Stanley Park. There's always been a vibrant history with Skinny Puppy and Stanley Park. Stanley Park, obviously, we all know it has a dark past. I'm not going to go into that now, but as you know, there has been like sort of some ghosts and stories to tell, and it was felt. When you're in the woods there, you could sense the feeling of the trees sort of like being able to give you a sort of scare, especially if you were in there at night. This was one of our favorite places to go hang out, and we ride our bikes there. It was quite a bit in the woods. And I used to consider that pile of rocks there highly suspiciously unusual till I heard all about the history of X-Way, and then realized that that's probably something to do with a native burial ground or something to that, some spiritual place for sure. So some very cool things to find within the park. But I think somebody was referring to the fact of this album's it's starting to be very dark. And I said, it sounds like a too dark park. And that's how the name came up, just quickly like that. And uh, it's, I think it's one of my favorite kind of like album titles because it kind of like represents something that I feel like is part of us, part of like, the band and part of um, our whole our whole take on things. Just previously, we had always felt that favorite photo session that we ever did was with Kevin Westenberg and Stanley Park, and this is for the Vivisect album. But Kevin recently published these photos that are just fantastic. I think that's probably my favorite picture there. This one, of course, was the classic one, and I was reminding Kevin that he had been taking these pictures with apparently it was like some form of really old Polaroid camera that he had to put, the thing, blanket over his head and everything like that. But I thought it was a just unbelievable time. Um, the band, when we were getting back together and doing this, it didn't feel like there was like, ill will or anything. We were still kind of like able to like approach the album and come in and though we did things separately, we meaning that the music would be recorded, we'd lay it down, we'd produce the music all the way, and then Ogre would come in with Rave at the end, and that's literally like the icing on the cake. It was like the last phase was, okay, here we go, vocals, and very little would change after that. I don't remember coming in and having like, there would never be like arrangement changes or anything. We'd pretty much follow the scope of how the demos were written, and that was our formula. I think Rave and Ogre, as I've said previously, always have worked extremely well together when they'd hear a demo and how to approach it, how to enter it, and how to make it out. Because a song like Convulsion was, not really a straightforward type of song. And let me just say that if I'm referring back to the concept of returning back from Jamaica, I remember that Convulsion was one of the first songs that I rolled into Dwayne's apartment, and it smelled delicious in there. It smelled like the green guy, and that was like it was like the first seedless super weed that we'd ever seen or heard. And if you got it, it smelled exactly like a skunk, which is really weird. You don't smell that anymore, but it was like the beauty of the skunk, not the ugliness. So I came into Dwayne's apartment and it was just smelled like skunks. And I would put on the headphones, and what was great is that Dwayne was a very avid sampler. And so whenever I would show up, he would typically have a new array of S900 samples and a new array of bass samples and other things on one of the Emaxes. And then I was lucky enough to be able to come in with my array of noise. So I came in and the first day made Convulsion, and then I left and I'd leave it with Dwayne. Pretty much the drums, the bass, the noise, a lot of like sort of the radio distortion and the craziness, and then Dwayne could come in and add whatever he wanted. So funny, Dwayne, for the most part, didn't add a lot of things on a lot of the songs that I would leave with him, and in some cases I'll point out where he did. He, of course, was always the classic guy, in this case, to come up with the samples from LSD 25 from 1967, or from The Legend of the Overfiend from 1989, the samples in Convulsion. And it's just the perfect framework for what that song would become. It's S900 drums, hand played, basically boom boom ka boom boom ka type thing. The bass line and the sounds in it are created from radio distortion and basically just rhythmic distortion. And I thought like there can be no possible inspiration or sign coming from Jamaica in this, but in some ways, maybe. I mean, it was a weird thing because somebody said you came back from Jamaica and wrote Convulsion. It's like, yeah, I can't quite understand it myself. It kind of cracks me up too. There's a funny story about Convulsion in that I think we opened the tour with Convulsion in 2014, and our our tour manager Steve, big up Steve, uh, was with us for his second tour, and we opened with the song, and we came off the first show, and Steve pulled me aside and said, "What in the goddamn hell was that?" And I mean, what? He says, that first, whatever you call it." And I was like, "Oh, that's Convulsion." He's like, "Oh, I don't get it, man. I just don't get it." So it's like, it was kind of funny that really freaks out some people. And granted, it's one of those songs. He's terribly uncomfortable, and ain't gonna fight your wars. I mean those samples in there from Dwayne were just framed it up absolutely perfectly. Um, Moving on to Tormentor, quite often what I do is I'd take a song that I'd already written, and in this case I took the song Hilter, which was on Call the Ambulance, which I kind of liked. And the reason I went there was because I liked the bass sound in Hilter. So what will happen is that when you recall a song and you get up the sounds, you get it up, you can just like start erasing parts and then start like redoing, like redid the bass line, redid everything. So all of a sudden, Hilter from Call the Ambulance Before You Hurt Yourself uh, turned into Tormentor. And it's it's kind of like one of those songs where I was so into bass lines at this point, and I think that is definitely an indicator of being sort of like semi a bit of Jamaica's coming out there, but there's definitely a funkiness that was in me that I think there's an extension from Censor, Dog Shit from Vivisect was sort of coming back, that Tormentor would be sort of like a return to that vibe. And the sample is from The Hip, Bob Clark, 1987. You are a god. I must say that it is one of my favorite songs to play live, and we haven't played it a lot live. Um, I, I, I'm, who knows? Maybe we'll play it. I won't give anything away yet. We'll leave surprises to you guys. Um, but as I've said, it's one of my favorite songs. It's largely a Kenny song. Um, Dwayne added the samples again, and then of course he was always instrumental of coming up with the samples of which where I hand do the drums. All the drums in there are hand programmed, basically 808 samples mostly, and the other bass sequence in there is the Emacs playing. Dwayne used to sit there and take a lot of samples from analog keyboards, so we have a huge library of if you it's weird that we have Pro One samples or Moog samples or like any other bass you can think of. But the cool thing was is that when you sample it, it takes on a different dimension. It doesn't sound exactly like it did from the synth. I think that's the Curtis filter, and plus you could detune very easily, the components of the parameters of say the filter or the resonance and stuff like that, and get some really interesting variations. And that was happening heavily in Tormentor. Um, yeah, let's move on to Spasmolytic. Spasmolytic. Oh wow, this is a Dwayne idea that came up while we are in the studio, um, making the album Too Dark Park, of course. And so essentially the sequence is you sort of get it at the beginning, and essentially that was really all that there was for timing. There wasn't really any drums or anything there. And at that point he hadn't added the don 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 bass lines. But I had heard some components of how the song was building in a certain direction, and there were I had set up the Mushroom Studios drum kit um, in quite close to the control room, and it was mic'd up and all ready to go. And I said, Dwayne, I'm going to lay down what will be a map of the song, so that basically my idea was is that I would go in and create the sections. So the sections are created by the three different drumming styles. So you have the first section, which will be, and then that will build up and it will go into a halftime section, and then it will go into another section and it will be another thing. So what I would do is just count in my head what I could feel could be a good build, a good drop, and then a good component to build around, so to speak. And the one thing that I do have to say is that was I think I almost had a heart attack when I finished that drum take, because it's a one take, all Spasmolytic on one take, and no overdubs. And I was super happy with what's known as bonhams. If you're a drummer out there, you know what I'm talking about. There's a few bonhams in the song that I really, at that time, I was really big on bonhams. So what bonhams are is, for you non-drummers, is you sort of hit the snare drum and your front tom and your floor tom consecutively, so and it was something that I believe was conceived by John Bonham, was maybe not invented, but most famous. And there's a couple in there that I'll say, I guess I'm proud of the drum performance. The song was written around drums, very similarly to Jaya in the process, where drums came first and then the song was composed around it. So I think that of all the songs that we have, as far as like a live feeling is concerned, I think that the just the way, you know, it came off, and just the way that if when it came to performing the song live, we had some serious train wrecks where you know, it was you know, I couldn't say that I could perform it, you know, consistently all the time, but what was nice is that it would just make this make this just crazy crazy train wreck type of stuff. So you know, it was one of those things where it was yeah, I'm trying to find this thing for you guys right now that was like basic footage of us playing that song live, and it was filmed by Jim Van Beber. Of course, we all know the video for the song. There's been a lot of questions to me about the video and like the things that, you know, are contained within the video. This video was made by Gary Smith and Jim Van Beber, who were the guys that made you know, a lot of the Chunk Blower stuff. And Jim, of course, had made went on to make Charlie's Family. I believe there's some sort of weird outtakes here from the video. The video featured the Chair of No Cares, which is something that we had in the live set. Probably the most the heaviest prop that we ever had in history. I think there's some sort of like elements of talking about cocaine addiction and abuse like that in this particular era, it being a challenge, kicking the habit. What's odd is the foretelling of Dwayne in the video with the exploding cake scene. I found that to be, I don't know, if when I look back on it, it's really odd. It's because this girl here in the video, the blonde-haired girl, Corinne, was actually his girl at the time, and when he and her split, I found that that's when life got very chaotic for Dwayne. And so the significance almost of Dwayne exploding, it's almost a strange foretelling. But also just the whole element, the feeling of it all was odd. Um, yeah, so Spasmolytic, quite just what can I say? That was released on a 12-inch right here, and the cover, of course, done by Jim Cummings, Eater. Uh, what's really cool is that I was lucky enough to. Oh, you guys can't see it. Let me turn off the video effects. Okay, video effects. It's time for you to take a break. Hold on one sec here, folks. Let's see here. You need to see the painting. Yeah. So this is the original painting for Spasmolytic by Jim. And what's nice is that, you know, it's obviously an oil painting. It wasn't created in Pro Tools, and it wasn't created in Photoshop. What's nice about it is that it's kind of got, you know, nice textural feeling. I probably shouldn't touch it. There is some shine off it. There is no covering on top of it. It's just straight painting on black wood. Here it is here. It says the price on the back. It says $850, but I'm pretty sure that Jim sold it to me for cheaper than that. What was also nice is that I believe I got this at the same time, and this is the back cover of Spasmolytic, and it's just such an awesome painting that Jim did. I mean, I'm kind of blown away that Jim isn't more legendary in the world right now. Like, he still has amazing art shows. The guy is still killing it with his, you know, I could say every few months he has an art show, and his works on his recent show have elements of Last Rites all through it. If you look at it, it's got the cliffs and all the mountains that are always contained in Jim's work, which I absolutely love. These mountains in the background are kind of like his thing, and so if you collect or see any of his works, say for instance like the Hilt album cover back there, it has the same mountains and stuff. The Last Rites cover has the same mountains and stuff like that, but you know, quite classic. Where were we? Here we were. Yeah, so we're talking about Rash Reflection. It's funny, Rash Reflection, the song comes about as a result of hanging out with the Green Guy. And yes, there is a real guy named the Green Guy. His name was Phil. And here he is here. And so Phil basically would talk a lot about... this doesn't seem to want to play. Phil would talk a lot about this experience that he had. Here's the old Mushroom Studios. And basically, he was one of these guys that in Oregon in the 1980s basically had kind of become part of a cult. And the cult was based on this guy, and I want to call him the correct name, but he referred to him as the Rajneesh. So the Rajneesh had a cult where he arrived in Oregon, and this is him here. And he was famous. He had like a 64,000 acre muddy ranch, and a lot of people ended up there who donated heavily to him, and basically he ended up being a scam. And he owned a lot of Rolls Royces, and apparently he was hitting on a lot of the women that were attending there and seeking their purity. So it was going against you know, all angles. And so Phil was telling us a lot about this. So basically the lyrics of Rash Reflection are all based on this and the story. And I think it's good timing to show you guys this thing that I prepared for you to show you kind of like how some songs are created. So that essentially is the essence of what I mean by having a certain sample, and those samples were from the radio. So who knows what that the dun 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 down is, but a lot of the songs on the album, and I'm going to show you some more of these videos. I hope you guys could hear that. Let me know if you could hear the audio in that. Could you hear that? Okay, good. Excellent. Thank you for letting me know. Yeah, so I have a couple more of those to give you an example with certain songs. Um, I believe that I have one maybe on the song that we skipped, which we did, and this one you can recognize that where that's from, and let me just show you that. Get this up here. Yes, indeed. It's so big, it's hard to see the controls. Anyway, so yeah, Convulsion was once again a rack of samples, much like this. Monsters. And so yeah, that's how that one goes. Rihanna's writing a note. What are you trying to say? Feedback. Well, that's actually probably the sound in itself. Um, I get complaints from Rihanna all the time, but I play any sound that's harsh in the house. That she basically gives me an earful. So sorry about that, honey.
Oh my gosh, that's not what I was saying at all.
Anyways, I also would like to say that Greg really had stepped in for the first time since the beginning of making Skinny Puppy stuff, and this would be the first song that he would mix. I believe Rave had to go back to Montreal for a family emergency, and so Greg stepped in. Here's the lovely Greg with Bill Lieb. Greg would go on to mix several songs on the album. I believe three actually, and that would be Rash Reflection, Shoreline Poison, even though they made a mistake on the thing and didn't say that, and also I believe it's possibly Reclamation. But yeah, Greg. Oh no, it's Tormentor. Sorry, Greg. Yeah, you mixed Tormentor. That was your first song that you mixed. I kind of thought like I was a little bit when we first did Tormentor. I think Ogre drops in the first few lines. I think he says retroactive, and I started thinking, oh no, is this going to be some? There's going to be some hard feelings about the project that we did with Bill, but I probably was reading too much into that. Moving on to Nature's Revenge. This would be day 3 of No Smoking Pot. Coming to Dwayne's house and smelling just beautiful smells and trying to pain my way through it. It was a song again where I was playing with just essentially the bass line. So the dun dun dun. Ba-dum, 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 bum, 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 bum. So I was playing with that, and then I would do sort of like lay in a second bass line, which is sort of like a second line underneath, and then the string line, and then came in, laid down the drums, and left that song again at Dwayne's, and again he came up with the classic "Scared" from Communion. And so this time was weird is that there was some amazing choral stuff that Dwayne added. The choral goodness, so the choral strings, and and other than that, I guess you might want to say apartment written. So brought it into the studio, and then when we got into the studio, it was time to call Mr. D. Plevin. Which he came in and did a classic fretless bass line, which I absolutely love. I mean, Dale and I go all the way back to the days of loving Mick Karn from Japan, and there was just something about the song that had a liquid feel to it, and similar to Glass Houses in a weird way, or Texture. Calling Dale in was always pleasurable. The outcome was always great. And so there's a classic fretless bass line added to the other two bass lines, and they're making it a 3 bass line song. The drums, S900, again, Dwayne samples. Emax bass on that one. It was like a layered Moog with Pro 1, I believe, sample. The ESQ FM synthesis is prominent in the song. And I also put in some live, sort of cymbal, sort of ambience room stuff, and sort of like a very light take on sort of like giving it like a room sound. It should be important to point out that the whole album was mixed in Little Mountain Studios, which was close to Mushroom. It's also on the other side of the Cambie Street Bridge. I believe it's also on West 6th. And what was really weird is that my dad's office when I was growing up was right next door to where Little Mountain was. So I had this weird trip when I was first going there. And Little Mountain was famous at the time for mixing most and recording most heavy metal albums, most prominently Metallica. It's where Bob Rock basically his headquarters at the time, and also a lot of the albums like Scorpions, Bon Jovi, you name it. Basically, they were in the studio there. I believe when we were making Too Dark Park, I remember the Scorpions were in the next room, and so it wasn't common to see a lot of like big hair metal dudes walking around. Skid Row, I remember seeing that Skid Row guys, and I think I maybe told this story on another chat, but when Chris Shepherd dropped by the studio, quite often Chris claimed that he was basically there for inspiration or disturbance, as he called it, but sometimes he would make us take acid, and so. Yes, we took acid, and then we ended up not being able to work, and thus someone came in mid-evening and said to me, "Hey, someone in this room own a Volkswagen?" And I'm like, "Yeah, me." And they go, "Someone just stole it." And when you're on acid, that's like the worst thing you can hear. So I ran out front. My car was still there, but all the doors were open. And that day I had gone to the laundry. A Chinese laundry. I was getting my laundry done, and it was in a bag in the back. So they had taken the bag out, and they had taken my laundry, and because they just discovered it was my laundry, they just threw it all over the street and all over the front bushes of the studio. And it was snowing, and there was snow all over the ground. So here I was like hallucinating that, man, that's my shirt over there. And so I was picking up all my clothes and everything, and I was like, at this moment, I happened to be behind this bush. It was like right in front of the window of the studio. And at that very moment, the guys from Skid Row walked up and they were in full regalia. And I was like looking, I'm like, it looked like, you know, like guys, like if you've seen the 80s guys, you know, dressed to the nines, it was like, it was unbelievable. And I think they said some wisecrack to me like, what you doing in there or something. And I'm like, I'm looking for my socks. But Chris Shepard was a great guy to come in and disturb us. The extended versions of stuff that's on some of the 12 inches, Chris is kind of like, I believe, is it which one is it? One of them's Chris. Is it the Spasmolytic? No, it's Tormentor. The extended version of Tormentor is the blue vinyl version and is the Chris Shepard, I'm going to disturb these guys version. Also edited by Anthony Valsic. Anthony has been a regular part of our crew with Skinny Puppy. He would go on to make the classic album, the classic song "Download" with Dwayne. I'll get into that on the Last Rites chat, though. So, Nature's Revenge, we played that a few times live. I think the last time we played it live was Doomsday, and always, for me, it's one of my, I don't know, it's just got a great vibe. Shoreline Poison. This is a song I get asked a hell of a lot about. How did you make this, and what's the sound of this and so on, and I've got another video here to show you on this one. Let me cue this up for you. It always wants to start playing. Yeah, and this would be, hopefully you guys can hear this okay. You can see that is largely noise. That fragment of a beat that you heard at the beginning, I would sequence that, sort of like create the basis of like what the kick drum would do. I'd use the kick drum with that sound, and then basically the rest of the samples in the song are from the S900, and would basically frame up the drums. But nearly all of the song is created with noise, in the sense of the general part of the song. The middle section is very similar to the typical, I'll call it a song where always would take a song with an idea of noise, and then in the middle part it'll go into a melodic structure. So again, it was written in my apartment at 1455 Robson Street. Pretty much had fully fleshed out the middle part on my own, and this was a song that I brought along and did all those kind of like better part of the noise samples in Mushroom, and then created the song, the better part of the other sections in the studio there. And the odd skip in the rhythm was just by fluke. And if I could, I'll call it a happy accident. It's a classic Greg really mix, and what I really liked about it was Greg added what I'll call the classic 3/8 delay, or 3/16 delay, depending on how you want to look at it. That delay is the section in the end where the tempo is kind of like picks up into a skip. on the day that I was working on the song, when I was working on it at home, my fire alarm went off in the building, and I heard how good the fire alarm sounded with the song. So that is why I added the fire alarm. Just that it just perfect. Samples are from The Trip, 1967 Roger Corman film. The Light. And is largely, Kevin's song, Dwayne. It was pretty much a finished track idea, so wasn't a lot added. A lot of people have asked about that chorus part, about how you heard that's in the sample. It's just dum, ba-dum, brr. I mean, to me, that is like why I took radio samples. I have no idea what it's from. I have no idea. You know, I didn't know at the time when I took it that it would turn into that. I just took it, and then later when I'm jamming, I turn into this sort of situation. So, just a total gas, really. And the thing is that I realized about when I made Too Dark Park, is, by the way, I eventually gave in and couldn't last not smoking pot. So I think I lasted about 2 weeks. And, but before that happened, I went day 4 there and wrote Grave Wisdom. And Grave Wisdom was a song that, again, I was just jamming on headphones. And what was really odd about that time is that I remember that Dwayne's girlfriend, Corinne, was always also cooking. She was cooking the most amazing meal for Dwayne. It was like it looked like a royal feast. But so I was not in a room alone. I was in a room where I was like thinking like, man, this is like not the easiest situation. And I had said to Dwayne earlier about how much I really liked the Prince snare. And so I had asked him to make a great sample where I could play write a song utilizing that classic Prince. I believe it is the when doves cry snare. I'm going to say, what's that from the Lindrum possibly? But it's so prominently featured in Grave Wisdom that when you listen to the song again, you will not be able to not hear it. So for me, I just really love the sound. So I was like, okay, I got the Prince snare. And again, it was created with samples, much like the way you saw, where the loops or the little chunks of guitar could create these little. I mean, it was uncanny that how well some things work with things. But when you were tuning samples to work with the song you kind of had written as an idea, then that's how those like guitars were added. It's got the classic ESQ, which is what I consider to be that detuned ending, the very last 4 notes. The ESQ again plays a really prominent role in Grave Wisdom. Probably plays a better part of the sequences as well as as that tonal thing. The bass line is from the Emacs. It's a sample again of the Pro 1. And there is no live Pro 1 on any song that I've mentioned so far, if you can believe it. And no analog drum machines yet. They're all samples. So everything that you've heard on Too Dark Park has come from samples. The only time we've ever played Grave Wisdom live is at Doomsday. And I'm not too sure why that is, actually. When it comes time to construct live sets, we all discuss what songs we want to see, and it's never a song that shows up on anybody's list, at least within the band. So I really wanted to play Nature's Revenge and Grave Wisdom at Doomsday, and so I basically made it happen. And I would like to see these things happen again, but until that day, we'll see when that happens. What's that? Let's see. This is what the classic Skinny Puppy Too Dark Park poster. What, you have a few of these still, don't you?
Yeah, they're available on our website, subcontoy.com, and so are these all access after show passes on subcontoy.com.
Look at that. It disappears into it. But what's cool about this poster is that it actually has the entire painting on it. Where is the painting? I believe Dave Ogilvy possesses the painting in Vancouver, Canada. However, since the communication between Rave and I hasn't happened in 25 years, then I don't know. So, where were we? Grave Wisdom. Moving on to TFWO. Totally fucking weirded out. That's what it means. Totally fucking weirding out. And I believe this is probably the most reggae-inspired song on the album. If you listen closely, there is some reggae in it. And what I mean by that is that the inspiration of some of the bass lines was based on some songs that I had heard in Jamaica, but was just whacked out. And this was a song that I remember I had done a bunch of stuff, and I just left it with Dwayne, and Dwayne brought it all together. So in reality, this was probably the biggest collaborative between Dwayne and I on the album, as far as like the noise factor, playing with noise together, and creating something in the end which was totally fucking weirded out. It was also day 5 of me not smoking pot, which if you think about it, it's so weird that I'd write such odd music. You would think that you'd start smoking pot and write odd music. No, it's when Kevin doesn't have weed, he writes odd music. So, totally fucking weirded out. Had to pay tribute to Flesh for Frankenstein, Andy Warhol, in the film. You got to fuck life in the gallbladder. I believe that was the quote. And we have played this song many times live. Also, it has been covered by Pigface, I believe, and played live as well by Pigface. Big up Pigface. And was always a gas. Let's see here. Morpheus laughing. Oh my God. So many people ask me about this. It's, again, an apartment song that I wrote in my apartment. And when I think back on it, I look at the chord changes on it. And especially if I have to relearn this song and go into like looking at where the chords flow, I always ask myself, wow, these are odd. This is odd chord changes. I mean, try and sit down and play it. There's nothing more pleasing than learning it and knowing it after you learn it. It just gives you a rush when you play it. It's like you are constantly thinking throughout the entire piece. You know, the bend note F sharp is completely off the key of the song. It's, you know, there's a section in D, and the rest of the song is in G. It's really weird. Yeah, it goes down to F, and all sorts of like, I don't know. When I think after, what I really like about it though is, again, a classic drum kit with a mixture of the Prince snare again, a classic. I was able to mess with the 64ths and 32nds of the drums as far as programming is concerned. And so at the end, you will hear these sort of ripping. I mean, at that time, I was like, really thought like, this might ruin the song. And then now when I look at it as being like how we could have a chance to infect the song with some sort of hyperactivity, it really works. And of course, there was all S900 drums. ESQ, Emax prominent in the song. It's almost all Emax and ESQ. Someone has pinned the sample from the song Orange. No, that's not it. There's another sample from it that has been penned from Saturday Night Live Classic. I don't know if that's true or not. That's just what's in Wikipedia. I don't know if that's true, but it could be. It's a song we have played live a few times, and when we play it live, I find that if we get it right, it can seriously give me shivers. It's probably the song that gives me, if we play it, it gives me the most shivers if we play that song. So let me know your thoughts. What songs out of Too Dark Park would you most like to hear live? Let's talk about Reclamation, the last song on the album. Apparently, the album time's in at 38 minutes. It has to be the shortest album we made, I think. I noticed that a lot of the songs are three minutes something, which for all you guys who make music out there, I think we get our most solid reviews from Too Dark Park. I'd say the best way to get maybe good reviews on an odd album is to have short songs and not be too self-indulgent. 38 minutes is enough time to, blast anybody's head out of the seat. So Reclamation is a Dwayne classic. And it has to be said that his collection of samples to create the song is really, it's really mind-boggling. I've got another thing here to show you. Let's see here. You guys got to be loving these videos. Hopefully they sound okay. But the Reclamation board is a thing of beauty. Yeah, Reclamation as seen on the Emacs, how the samples sort of like are the impetus for the entire song. And again, it was a song that I thought it was like a more fleshed out idea, like Dwayne had come up previously with Coral One or Coraloni and Rain, that were like these mini sort of like epic pieces that, I call it full Dwayne world. And Reclamation was nothing short of that. He built it up, and I added acoustic drums. The acoustic drums was something that when we played this song live on the Too Dark Park tour this song would build to a different dimension every night. And I think that it reached certain peaks in certain places where I could feel the energy of it lifting. So Dwayne would also be adding more stuff live, and we'd be improvising on top of it. And with Dwayne's large collection of keyboards, and the greatest compliment ever was we finished playing in New York City live on the Too Dark Park tour, and we were backstage, and knocking came on the door, and it was the entire Einstürzende Neubauten band. And they came into the dressing room giving us hugs saying, wow, this was amazing. Oh my God. And it was like, okay, I guess that's probably, one of the bigger compliments that you can receive from anybody. And big up to the Neubauten guys. They were probably the heaviest band that I ever saw in my life at that time. So it was, as I said, quite the compliment. The samples in there from Watership Down and Hellraiser Hellbound. And the classic sample at the very end, of course, is a live recording of Thunder that we had taken in the studio in Mushroom. Because every season that we would go to record these albums, which would typically be in the summertime, there would always be these huge lightning and thunderstorms. My dog would be just terrified. But that is a real thunderclap. Ken Marshall took the mic outside, or just as near to outside as he could. I believe it was right in the doorway, and had it set up. And you can even hear Ken saying, "Oh, look out, here it comes." And that was the biggest thunderclap ever heard, and couldn't believe how good it sounded when we played it back. It's something that almost becomes like a good part of like what true Skinny Puppy is. And the reason I say that is when we played in Doomsday, our reformation gig in August of 2000, we finished the last song, which wasn't Reclamation, but as we finished, and we were no more than a minute off the stage, the same thunderclap happened, and it was just immense, and it just downpoured right after that, just opened and downpoured on everybody, and it hadn't rained all week. It was just, there was no sign of this going to happen, and right 1 minute after our show, so we thought, look, Dwayne, buddy, that was you, hope so. It was always like, a feeling that, hopefully Dwayne will give us a sign one day or something like that. If that wasn't a big enough sign, I don't know what is. There isn't a lot of photos of the setup, and especially, I can't believe I don't have a lot of pictures of it. But I had this massive drum kit that was consisted of all these barrels that had been given to me from test department, and then I had the big AOT drums, those toms on there about 400 feet long. I had the radio drums as well as like an Emax back there on the setup, and there's another picture of it, I believe. Thank you for whoever took these pictures. I believe you're in Houston. The classic Dwayne rig. I always loved that Dwayne had these trees covering the rig. Great idea, actually. Probably one of the most classics, Skinny Puppy shows that Ogre probably has ever conceived. It was just the most visually crazy show you've ever seen. He did the stilts, he was raised to the ceiling, all sorts of outfits. We had the chair of no cares, which you can see back there behind him. This is immense, just immense props, just heavy too. Dwayne had the great hair as usual, and there's a better picture of the chair of no cares. It's also featured in the Spasmolytic video. They would tour with us, and I believe one night it fell backwards when we were playing in Portland, and it fell through, we were playing a movie theater, and it fell through the movie screen. And so we were charged for that. Didn't make any money from that show. But those of you in Portland who know that venue, basically, you know that you can watch your movies. But yeah, the stage setup was, a massive undertaking as far as like getting it all down for how to tour. A fantastic crew that we had. And I remember that one of the greatest things is that Jim Cummins came up with the idea that we should have 12 different types of shirts. And I'm almost certain that Jim screened these shirts all himself. So if you have one of these original shirts from the Too Dark Park tour, it would be an original Brain Eater. And yeah, there was 12 different designs. And when we showed up, I think that's the first time that I ever saw like so much merch where we were just like, oh my God. But everyone loved it, and they sold out, totally sold out. And so basically that was classic Jim. Oh, you're wearing it right now. Rihanna's wearing the classic Jim art today. What can I say more about Jim? I mean, the reason we chose to go and work on an album with Jim, it wasn't because, we had any problem with Steven. It was Stephen Gilmore. It was just that we were also close with Jim. And I believe that we, somewhere along the way, we'd promised Jim that we would always work with him on something. So came the opportunity, and Jim started working on it. And as soon as we saw it, we were like, oh my God, this is just absolutely perfect. There's Fisherman with a bootleg Too Dark Park pillow that was showing up coming from China. I believe there's like pillows, shower curtains, God, all sorts of things. Here's Jim and I in his studio in Vancouver. Of quite a few years back. As I said, Jim is incredibly prolific still and continuing to make great stuff. Check him out on Facebook. Jimmy Cummins. No G. Cummins. Yeah, the classic masks. These were the two promotional items that were made for Two Dark Park and released. I happen to have a couple here myself. And the art. One thing that I was always kind of disappointed in is that, the album didn't feature the entire painting. And the entire painting is just so beautiful. And even though there are components of it all over the place, I wish that the album cover had been kind of like what's behind me, kind of like the logo with the whole cover. If you want to find out about Jim, go and look him up here. There's a chat on Patreon here, chat with iBrain Eater. It's in the archives. And we go through everything. We talk about it all. Jim, of course, he's from iBrain Eater, and a classic old Vancouver punk band, came about before Skinny Puppy, and was one of the leading inspirations of a lot of us that grew up in town. As it said, the Spasmolytic cover also with those classic mountains in the background. And the back cover of Spasmolytic, that classic shape I just showed you the original painting of. The blue vinyl. I always wanted blue vinyl. Finally got it with Tormentor. Believe it or not, back in those days, they used to say, no, you can never have colored vinyl. We wanted to have white vinyl remission. No. We wanted to have a color this or that. No, it's got to be black and white. So finally we got that. Also this logo, the Skinny Puppy logo that's been featured on, that Jim came up with, is easily the most, I'll say, tattooed logo. I mean, if you've got one of these on your arm right now, then you know what I'm talking about. But very classic painting, and once again, all hand done on the, like I believe oil, of course, oil on wood, and just like the other ones. Just a classic Jim Cummings sort of approach. Here they are here. And then on the back was, it would say, the new album coming 10/30/1990. Why didn't we release it on one day later, Halloween? Hey, look, we all disappear. Anyway, so it says here that we're releasing Bark, a non-album track, and Nature's Revenge dub. It looks like we've got Minneapolis, Milwaukee, St. Louis, Chicago, Indianapolis, Cincinnati, Columbus, Cleveland, Detroit, Toronto. Toronto, too. Montreal, Somerville, Springfield, New York, New Haven, College Park, Maryland, Pittsburgh, Virginia Beach, Charlotte, Atlanta, Gainesville, Melbourne, Miami Beach, St. Pete, and Orlando. That's a lot of dates. See, Rihanna, we did do a lot of dates on that tour.
What?
Yeah, more than I thought.
Where?
It's not here. I remember the tour being long, but not that long. Talk about the Tormentor EP. Again, another Greg Reilly edit mix by a mix by Greg Reilly, edit by Anthony Valsic. Shep's Interference, as I've mentioned before. Bark. Bark is a pretty heavy song. I always thought Bark should have been possibly on the album. It's a Dwayne song. Classic Dwayne composition. And what's really weird is that I could see Dwayne was getting inspired by reggae as well, because there is a completely, what I almost call hyper dance hall section. Classic guitar sampling. It's one of those songs that I get asked about a lot as well. Why don't you ever, blah, 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 blah. One thing, my memories that I have to say about the song Bark is, for some reason, when I went in for my face surgery, for when I had the face cancer, I went in and the nurse was asking me, oh, are you in a band or something like that? And I'm like, yeah. Well, what's the name of your band? I'm like, Skinny Puppy. And so while I was getting my face basically chopped up. It was a pretty traumatic thing. All of a sudden, I started to hear assimilate, and I'm like, oh my god, what? I said, am I hearing like our music? She goes, well, we just wanted to hear, like what your band sounded like, and then it went on to Tormentor, and so Tormentor started playing, and I started hearing the lyrics, the face ripped apart, cuts to the heart, and I was like, this is too weird, because here I was sitting here, pretty much getting my face ripped apart, and I was thinking like, this is just like heavy duty shit. I mean, I got slashed right straight down the face, and that was no joke. That was there. This here is piece of my forehead that they had to twist around into what was known as a thing for the skin graft here, that they replaced this section of my whole nose and face. But I thought it was weird to hear Tormentor while this was happening, and then it continued on into Bark, and I started listening to Bark, and I started thinking, wow, like this song, but for some reason it was something that I guess that was too much for them. I don't know what it was, but now whenever I hear Bark or Tormentor, I always never forget the moment of like getting the hardcore face surgery. It wasn't definitely wasn't my favorite thing.
That was a day for sure.
Yeah, that was a day for sure. Rihanna says. I think she came in after, and I was like, they just played the music. And I was like, are you kidding? Yeah, I don't know. I guess they were trying to be nice and everything, but it kind of shook me up a little bit. Nature's Revenge dub. I mean, when I listen to it, the original song for me is the song, and when I listen to the dub, how we would make those things is you lay down a section, and then you cut it into a 1/4-inch tape, and then you cut in a section. You say, okay, that sounded cool. Let's make it go here. Let's make it go here. I think it bounces around a bit much, but I've had a lot of people say they really dig it, and yeah, I can leave it at that. Now the Spasmolytic EP, that's something that I have to talk about, because I remember that this one, I kind of remember that we were good and high when we made this record. Like, I'm not talking the original Spasmolytic, I'm talking like the Spasmolytic extended version. I remember that we went in there and we just kind of went a bit bonkers, and it was just on pot as usual. But I refer to it as the extended version as the Madhouse session, kind of like a good and wasted mix. You want to hear what the good and wasted mix is of Spasmolytic? Listen to this extended version on the EP, and then you'll know exactly what I mean. It's the same as to be said for the Shoreline dub remix. It's the good and wasted mix. Was at that point, when you're making a dub of a song that you feel you've already said its piece, and then to break it down again, it was kind of like, it wasn't as exciting for us. Nevertheless, the idea was brought up to include some live tracks on this EP from the tour, and so we included Harsh Stone White live in Denver, as well as a track called Walking on Ice. Walking on Ice is a track that consists of 3 different versions of it, one recorded in San Francisco, one in Dallas, and one in Oklahoma City, and pieced together. But what it was improvisation that we would do each night during the tour, that Dwayne and I would just make up each night, and then thus by the end of the tour it almost becomes a song. I believe it turned into a song called All Eyes at one point, and took various forms because Ogre would also improvise vocally. So Walking on Ice was not an official song as much as, say, there's songs from our past as well, like Kill to Cure. It's a song we never recorded, basically only played live, improvised. It's the same with Walking on Ice. Basically, a lot of jams that we did live, I wish more of them were recorded, because sometimes a good portion of our set, 2 or 3 times, we would stop and improvise a song, and they were always fun. But I felt that the fluidity of those improvisations was because Dwayne and I were so used to doing that already that in a live circumstance we could basically just get together and I call it just okay off the cuff. And if you saw the Last Rites or True Dark Park tour, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The heavily brap heavy shows. Somebody was saying, it's so funny, somebody on Discogs was going into heavy detail about how there was some sort of scam or so. I don't know what they're talking about. It's like too much detail that I don't relate to. You ever see that where someone writes like an entire book of like information about Skinny Puppy and then like only a portion of it? Well, I guess you guys wouldn't know, but only a portion of it appears to be relevant. And then they go into some conspiracy theories about how I was holding out, and I'm incredibly dishonest that I didn't allow the live album to be created, or something to that effect. Nevertheless, whoever that is, like, you need to take a stress pill or whatever. There are other live recordings from that tour that that could be put together. Basically, it was not something that I had thought like immediately in running back to. It's still on my list of like maybe take a look at, but the quality, if you've heard sort of anything from that period, the quality is reasonable, but the quality is not like what I consider to be like absolutely outstanding. So upon review, I've gone back and actually said, well, maybe some time has passed now, so that basically I should maybe go retake a look again. But nevertheless, I'm still looking for this darn video. You guys probably know which one I'm talking about. It's the excerpts from the live show of Skinny Puppy around the time. It's the only footage that was captured by Jim Van Beber. It's I had it queued up, but for some reason now it is complete. It's completely evading me. Rihanna's writing me another note. What's it say? Oh, thank you for the super chats, everybody. I think that might be the first time that's probably. Oh, here we go. I found it. Okay. You guys are all aware of this footage that Jim took, I'm sure. Jim Van Bever. And what's ironic is that, this is the only footage that exists that what I would say that is of this quality. And it shows Dwayne's set up there. You saw the Prophet 5 I see that he had. This is the Chair of No Cares. The lights were great, and I believe that was done by our buddy John. Big up John. Look, I had sideburns. One thing about I wasn't just like I wasn't just the drummer of the band. I actually was the guy that typically played keyboards, but for live I felt that it was important to add some energy. There's a great shot of the stage and some of Ogre's masks. And so when it came time to playing live and adding energy and playing drums, I used to my hands would just get decimated. So I was really happy not happy, I was, when I moved up to keyboards and Justin took over for drums, I was quite happy because for me, playing drums was quite a physical exertion, quite a physical experience. Of course, the chair, the stilts, something that Ogre here invented as part of his show in, I believe this would be early 1991. and absolutely ripped off by Marilyn Manson. And that doesn't surprise me, though. Someone said that Marilyn Manson used to hand out cassettes of Skinny Puppy in Florida when he was young and tell people it was his band. It was pretty funny. Anyways, this footage here was hopeful that we would go on to make another live video or live recording, but as it was, this was the only show that was recorded, and I believe this show is in Cincinnati. Is it? Anybody know for sure? Let's see. I believe it's Cincinnati. Cincinnati, you got a thing for us. We'll be coming to see you again at Bogart's, I hear. So please don't arrest us.
Please don't arrest him.
Please don't arrest us. I see that you guys have made more comments today on the Patreon chat than ever before. You see, just then you saw the people getting up on stage. That's something that back in the day you could do. I mean, nowadays, I think it was after the Dimebag Darrell situation that, people, they're not, they don't look as kindly to people that come right up on the stage. It's kind of a bit scary. Excuse me for the cough. But it's important to point out that at the end of this show, Jim Van Bebber came on the stage with a gun with blanks and assassinated Ogre. And that was something that even the security was told about, but they did not know to the extent of what it was going to be. So I don't think they captured that because Jim was the guy that was filming this. So basically he was the guy that basically killed Ogre. And I think that if you tried to do something like that today, that would be it. They'd probably, have your ass. I certainly know that that's not something we think about like as possibilities or getting away with it. But it's crazy, man. I'd like to thank all of you guys for all of the comments on here. Let's see if we can at least look at some of these. Oh my God, 73 potential questions. And you guys know that in previous chats, when I've hit the question part, that it's gone on and on and on. I hope that I have covered a lot of what I consider to be answers to your questions. And forgive me today if I don't answer every question, but I go through and we just highlight and thank everybody. Thanks, Lyndon and Brian. Talk a little bit at sequencing those killer drums. As I said, Steinberg Pro 24, S900 drums, always by fingertip. Doom, bop, boom, boom, bop. Thank you for your question, Christian Day. Are the opening strings in Reclamation a sample? Well, you were shown today. That is a sample. How did we meet Van Bebber? I think Gary Smith met him through a movie that he had made called Deadbeat at Dawn. And Gary had been in touch with him about making Chunk Blower. So that's how that came up. Will Calendar, thanks for your question. Playing live, what was a tour like? As I said, it was long, brutal because of the physicalness of it, but rewarding in that sense that I knew that we were presenting a show that was making people's mouths go agape. And I don't know if that was because some of the videos that was being shown on stage, I happen to know that some of the videos that were shown on stage were scary as fuck. Basically, even I couldn't look at them. So if you were damaged by those videos, you can thank Gary Smith and Ogre. And a lot of that was, they were showing stuff like Guinea Pig and, some of these really scary horror films where I always had my doubts whether they were real or they weren't real. I basically can't watch movies like that. But yeah, some really scary movies, some really scary shit. Spencer. Hey, Too Dark Park, Entry Point, video for Spasmolytic. The origin of the video. What was it? Was it my idea to play a postal worker? No, I think that was Jim's. And it wasn't even my idea of how I deliver that message. You owe me an apology. It was completely Gary and Jim's script. I'm like the haunted postal guy, I guess. Thanks for your question, Peter. Epic album. Hoping we'll hear Tormentor. Oh, maybe. That said, there are so many songs I'm willing to hear. Rihanna says, water. Hope I answered the question. Jay Johnson, the story behind Bark. The sequences on the album just basically seemingly come from sort of like the gut feeling of how you feel. Oh, this one should, oh yeah, that sounds right, that sounds right. It's actually one of my more favorite parts with sequencing. Josh says, is there a possibility of a repress? What sort of label business? We're not sorted out our stuff with Network. Like, it's just been an ongoing situation of where everything just is left because it's not in the greatest of light. Not to show disrespect. I just think that Network could have done more to fix up the situation right, because our original contract that we've been held to is kind of like forcefully. I don't believe in being held to anything forcefully. If you want to work with a company, you shouldn't be there by force. Or the albums, it shouldn't have been a sense of being tricked into by reading a contract and saying that it appears to me that this contract expires in 10 years, by all means. But the contract didn't. And page 18 basically says that this contract and the rights to the album basically never expire. And that was something that we would have never have done. And so it was kind of like, you learn your lesson when that happens to you in a contract. Now, trying to get out that and try to organize that into a fair contract has been impossible for some strange reason. So, that's why the albums kind of remain in the position that they're in. They are available. And they're not in the best of shape. They need to, when they re-release them, master it properly and have them be dealt with appropriately, like a real re-release. And we would be behind these real re-releases if Network would come to the table and sort it out properly, which they have tried to do, but there is still some elements at which there just needs to be a very simple way of sorting it out. No more complicated contracts and pulling the wool with wording and in situations like this, we would come to the table if they would come to the table. So there's my statement on that. And respect to everybody. Don't go to Network and start complaining to them and say you treat Skinny Puppy bad. It's like, that's the last thing I want to have happen as well. So hopefully they'll come to the table and organize things appropriately in the future. Well, that would be really good. Richard says the tightest SP album in my opinion. Thank you. Wraith, Beauty and Chaos. Yep, thank you. My question, all your other projects around this time, how was it decided that this material would be Skinny Puppy? Well, it just, I guess, it didn't. It could. I guess some of the songs could have been other things, but because we started steering our way towards working on the concept of coming together and doing this, we just did it in our regular way. And our regular way was to exchange ideas with Rave, and work with Ogre on what songs were the most likely to work. They'd pick the ones that they liked, and then we'd work on them. Or, as in Shoreline Poison or Rash Reflection, written in the studio. Or Spasmolytic as well. Birdspanker, the day TDP came out, about the cassette. Oh yeah, the cassette. Oh right. Halfway through Convulsion, I ripped the tape out and went to my best friend's house because the music was too mind-blowing not to share. We danced around in his living room. It was 14. Holy shit, was that a good day. My question is, well, how does it feel to have recorded one of the all-time greatest albums? Thank you for the compliment, man. I actually have had no idea at the time that this would be the case. The thing that I like about it is that it is, to me, the quintessential sound of Skinny Puppy. And it's funny that they call it industrial because to me, I think that Skinny Puppy, Two Dark Bark is our most organic album. That's a funny thing to say. Two Dark Bark is super concise at 38 minutes, yet you write so much music. How do you select sequence? We just answered that one. Rubber, love your output. Thanks for the wait, Puppy in Cleveland. There you go, Cleveland. How did the members of Puppy reconvene after rabies? As I said, it was kind of a thing, like baby steps. Capitol Records was really supportive, though. I will say, Capitol, big up to Capitol, and how good Capitol was at that time with Tom Wally, Rachel Matthews, all the people that were part of our team in Capitol were great. This album is spoken as a masterpiece of sampling alchemy, but I was wondering whether any particular synth patches stand out to you. For me, it's the last sound in Grave Wisdom. It's the ESQ, and it's an FM synth sound. It kind of has the flavor of detuned FM synthesis, but also I'll say the bass line in Tormentor is probably one of my more favorite things personally. I don't believe we had the SY77 yet. I'm going to say, yeah, the ESQ really blew my mind in the sense where, especially going back and realizing, wow, that was the ESQ. Droid Harmony. Wow, this album does so much more, such reasonable running time. See, reasonable running time, 38 minutes. It's crazy. Other bands might have put more tracks on there. Yeah, that's for sure. To choose a single track, so tough. Here goes. Or a single question to ask. Could you please explain how Nature's Revenge was put together? As I said, I was rapping in my apartment. It wasn't really put together by noise samples. It was put together by just jamming on the bass line. And then adding another one. And then doing the drums. And then at that point, you got yourself a song. But the flavor of it was the thing that if you like the flavor of a song, and that's the reason you'll follow, and you start to see the picture come in. I believe that Nature's Revenge was, you know, I guess you might want to call the closest thing to the texture of the album. Really, you know, formulated by melodic structuring. Another thing I've noticed is that there doesn't seem to be any Roland 909 808. Yes, you are correct. As I said, there was no analog sync on this album at all. It was 100% made with the instruments that I showed you, the samplers, no drum machines, and all sequenced on the Atari of the Pro 24. Thank you, Jason Brown. Masterpiece. Andrew always wondered, is there a connection between Spasmolytic and Possession? No, there is no connection there. Of course, Spasmolytic is a complete Dwayne song, and though Possession may have elements of something to that, it was written years later. To overcome things, you must forget you're human, and only when you forget you're human will you remember you are a god. I believe that we sourced that here. Where was that? Tormentor voice is From the Hip, Bob Clark film, 1987. You know, I'm not familiar with the film at all. Dwayne was the one that found the sample, and pretty classic. Okay, you seemingly figured out where that came from. I mean, there's a lot of sources online that basically talk about this. It's pretty cool. Devin, pretty sure I heard this album in the crib. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's what is it now? It's a 33-year-old album, and that's getting up there. A lot of great questions being asked. So I guess I was wondering if you had any other words to add, if you haven't already, about the dynamic of transitioning to drums. What was Dwayne playing? How did you decide? I mean, as I said, I wanted to switch to drums because I could see that the audience would really pick up instead of having two guys on keyboards. You know, I thought, like, if I'm going to really drum and put my ass into it, you know, I'm going to do it because I was a drummer, you know, before, as far as like my first instrument, really. Though I had played keyboards all along too, I didn't really consider it my first instrument until obviously I started Skinny Puppy and made the first several albums, just obviously being the lone keyboardist. Of course, I worked with Bill Lieb and Ogre on lots of raps, but generally I was making 99% of the music I made on electronics. And as we got into sampling, the joy was there to say, take Prince's snare and utilize it for your own music. And that was fun. So, live, there was no, okay, I gotta add Prince's snare. No, you're gonna add, the biggest, dankest snare you can find on top of that. So essentially we would use backing tracks and we would play on top of them. And that's been always the formula of Skinny Puppy, is that we will have backing tracks and we will also play, in some cases, brand new parts on top. A new string sound, a new bass sound, a new bass line, a new sequence, a new bunch of samples, a new bunch of improvisations. That's something that you will always see if you see Skinny Puppy. It will be an improv. It will be an improv on top of an original idea, so that we have a roadmap. That's what makes it fun, anyway. Michael, hi Kevin. I'd like to ask about the TDP tour video audio. There are videos of Spasmolytic and Test Year that have, I guess you're talking about the Two Dark Park footage. So a lot of this footage was created by Gary and Ogre and I believe Dermot Shane and Bill Morrison before we went out on tour. And recently, a lot of this footage has been rediscovered and I believe I have posted several pieces of it online. And then now Dash has taken it upon himself to confer with Gary Smith and to find out where all the original footage was taken from. And then he is resourcing it all and basically recutting it into 4K. So the God's Gift Maggot that you saw the other day, posted here on Patreon, is exactly that. And Dash is also the one that recut the Warlock video with the original footage. And so I'm really liking this concept. The great thing is that Dash has gone out of his way to not only do one, but to do many of these videos. And you'll be seeing them over the next coming weeks. As when we get into tour, this is going to help me because our schedule is getting crazy. As a matter of fact, it's getting so crazy that I can't even express it. But you guys will be extremely happy. Rana, is it not crazy?
It's insane.
It's insane. Okay, here we go. Joe Irente from South America. How long did you guys spend mixing? I remember that we're on the SSL in Little Mountain Sound, and each song was definitely more than one day. It would be 2 days, probably on each song, and those mixes were all automated. Typically, the team was Ken Marshall, Greg Reilly, or Ken Marshall and Rave. Ken Marshall being the assistant, and Anthony would do the edits, and Dwayne and I would be standing by there doing our moves, whatever we needed to do, or offer our distractions in 2 cents, or Chris Shepard stepped in for a bit there. And the mixing, I'm going to say, that's when it started to get expensive. A better part of our budget was allotted for the mixing of these albums, because I remember we would spend 10 to 15 days in the studio. And the studio in those days was at least $1,000 a day in the mix studio. So it was expensive. And, the reason why it sounds so damn good is because they had the top of the line gear there. And, everybody knew what they were doing. So basically, that was that was the room to be. Thanks for your question. You'd love to hear the stems. Yes, I try to play the instrumental demos pre-mix here on Patreon. James Thomas Abbott, Nature's Revenge must be one of my most favorite songs of yours. Wow, lots of questions here, huh? What through sampling? Also love the pad string sounds. I did the pad strings and he did the choral stuff. What synth processing were you using? Just digital delays, just the delays. Did they come from Dwayne? Dwayne did the choral sections on that. They have such a beautiful and haunting quality. Yeah, Dwayne was always capable of coming up with the haunting chorals. Love lyrical content of Ogre and his vocal delivery. I think Rave's production of Ogre's vocals is always unsurpassed. Tormentor, despite being extreme and aggressive, is such a great, almost dance groove to it. It's, as I said, there was like Jamaican influences, even though you wouldn't know it, and going back to the funk. I was also inspired heavily by songs like Hashim, El Nayfish, and some of the early techno that had extremely funky bass lines. And so that would be my direct inspiration. No SY22 at this point. Talk about Grave Wisdom. Yeah, I think we've covered that here. The drums, TFWO, all hand-played drums, S900 samples. I'm trying to think if there was some acoustic drums on that as well. I believe there is, now that I think about it. Because I know that there's a sound in there of thrown drumsticks. So there is acoustic drum overdub as well on TFWO. Are there any concepts or messages on TDP that you feel us fans sometimes miss out? I believe that we're getting heavily into ecological disasters. I'm going to talk about the fragility of the earth. We're already talking about awareness of cultures and also the challenges of making it through addictions and things that were happening to various people within our group at the time. We had an incredibly fortunate creative atmosphere, and it wasn't until we made the mistake some years later where we went and tried to make albums differently. I'm speaking about the process, where we learned just how big of a mistake that was, because I think we kind of took for granted our atmosphere that we had in Mushroom Studios, as well as then our mixing, how we would then go to a bigger studio for mixing. Inevitably, we would move on from Little Mountain into other mixing studios, but that would become our framework. Another Nature's Revenge fan here. I don't know what emotion the vocals bring out in me. Resignation, perhaps, but I love them, the entire atmosphere. I want to hear about my favorite part of the album, the intro to Spasmolytic. As I said, that was the impetus for the song that Dwayne had made, and the structure of the rhythm was interesting enough that I could follow that if I counted it in my head. It's an odd count, but once you get the idea of it, you can drum structurally to it. And so to build the song, I had to have that really loud in my headphones and just followed that. And that's sort of like the roadmap all the way through. You know, I can't comment specifically on Ogre's his lyrics are something that I don't sit down with Ogre quite calmly and ask him what, you know, the true meaning is. I kind of formulate in a lot of cases my own meanings of things, but I do believe that he's speaking a lot in this song about the challenges of addiction. Being 1990, did you guys ever draw a parallel to what rap music was being done at the time? Well, as I said, I was fans of some of like what's become like the early parts of Jam On It and El Nayfish, which is kind of like the early forms of techno. So it wasn't really. I mean, I loved Schoolie D, and I loved like the Public Enemy, and the beginning of it all, but it wasn't really as inspiring as much as like deep techno was at the time, and so that's why you'll see. That's where the funk came in for me. Definitely Hashim. Sampling, same equipment, sampling practices, plant-based inspiration, etc. But SP has an ogre instead of a rapper. That's how it went. We dig it. I guess that'd be the closest that we come to like making something in that direction. But really hip hop hadn't really permeated society yet. So it was still like a style of music that was being played with. So it hadn't been, nothing was made in stone that was saying that, rap music couldn't go there. So, the Beastie Boys is a perfect example. And then as well, Dig It is a perfect example. could be seen as like other forms of rap music. I kind of like to hear any music stories you might have about the video shoot for Spasmolytic. I just remember that that was at the time when Ogre and I were still not speaking, and so it was very uncomfortable to do the video and to hand him that thing, you owe me an apology and all this stuff, and that face that I make at him. We had this funny expression back then called making the face, and it's that fun, that's it, the funny face, and it was kind of like this thing Dwayne and I used to do to make each other laugh, and it just I don't know, it was more uncomfortable than not, let me tell you. You know, Ogre and I have gone through many periods of time in Skinny Puppy where, you know, we can do an entire tour and be polite to each other, but we don't speak to each other. You know, Last Rites, I think, probably better part of Too Dark Park. There were just like times when everything was just too intense. There was too much other stuff going on that would come in and make it something that was too difficult to deal with. So, you know, for me, I remember around the time of Too Dark Park, that was the first time I remember being on tour, stepping away from the tour, where I'd have to go for walks away from the band because it was too intense. And I don't mean musically, I mean socially. It became too intense. There was just too much going on. There was, you know, other issues going on, other like headspaces going on. And it just became, for me, it was like I had to literally walk away and go for like a mile walk all the time, or, you know, anything I could do. And so it wasn't easy. It wasn't like, okay, yeah, it's when it started to become more challenging. It wasn't as fun anymore. But nevertheless, I was still thankful that we had the opportunities that we had. I recall Ogre saying the video had issues with release because the censors related the monster priest's chest exploding some sort of visual reference to orgasm. No, I think that, you know, what's weird, as I said earlier, that was playing into the whole idea that, you know, Dwayne was about to implode. Though I don't think that was something Dwayne was playing into as much as like Jim Van Bebber had written. And that's something that we should ask Gary and Jim Van Bebber about. Adam, I remember Chris Shepard debuting the album on Club 102. Yeah, CFNY. He said there was a record many would regard as trash. It gets 10 and 10 out of 10 in my books. Mine as well. Very next day, I took the subway down to Record Peddler, bought a copy. Yeah, Record Peddler was a great record store in Toronto. I used to go there myself when I lived there. I actually lived with Chris Toomey for, I think, about a year. If you can believe it, when we were there, yeah. Did you know the Seinfeld episode, there's a Skinny Puppy shirt displayed in the record shop window? Episode, The Old Man. I did not know that. It's also in Married with Children. I believe it's Skinny Puppy shirts are in other shows too like that, right?
Home Improvement.
Home Improvement, yeah. My favorite Skinny Puppy album and a work of true genius. Thank you. I can still vividly recall exactly where I was at the time I heard the album. What at first glance may appear as noise and chaos unravels to reveal such layered beauty. I'd love to see a vinyl re-release. I'd love to see a gatefold. That's what I'd like to see. Drew. Kevin, the artwork for this album always reminded me of cosmic, Lovecraftian horror and interdimensional themes. Is that vibe there at all for you? I think Jim just played into like our sense of loving monsters. We loved horror movies. We loved, in those days, I loved horror movies. That's because you weren't dealing with like I loved Videodrome, and I loved movies like The Thing, and I loved movies like some of the Lucio Fulci stuff, or the Dario Argento House by the Cemetery, things that were more psychological horror. And yeah, Jim just tied right into that. Most Skinny Puppy albums feel existential to me, but something about this one feels more apocalyptic and cosmic. Is there a thematic connection between the artwork and the music? I think that it's just Jim being the soul of Vancouver, and also tying into like where he knew we were headed, he just perfectly married into what his take on everything was, and it just perfectly matched. Jeremy, fucking masterpiece. Thank you. Goddamn yes. Pardon the excitement there. That's okay. So here's what I'm curious about: is this where the Drumosaurus makes its first appearance? Yes, it is. How much of the drums were done live, or at least composed? Well, I tried to explain that earlier. How some of the songs do have some drum overdubs, but most of it is S900 samples hand played. It's left out of the majority of those triplets and relentless wall of psycho alien noise. Somehow it makes perfect musical sense. That's because it was drummed by a drummer, including the noise. So as you saw, you can tap the noise by finger. So a lot of the things were made that way. And if you play with samples, you'll see that's extremely fun. I encourage anybody to go out there and take a whole bank of samples that you just don't know what the fuck it is, and then see what song it makes. Like a song like Pumpkin Park Zoos is a perfect example of where there's no other instruments except just noise, and it creates its own song. So I ask you to take that inspiration and make new albums with it. Xander, I don't even know where to begin with this album. It has so many great tracks. I guess something I'm very curious about is Grave Wisdom. I tried to go into detail here earlier. It's just so ESQ. And the Prince snare. I'm going to say, take the Prince snare and the ESQ, and that's the flavor of Grave Wisdom for you, Xander. Thank you for your support. Michael, this tour was my first time seeing Skinny Puppy. That's a good mind dent to have. You probably saw the videos then. I was quite surprised to see one of the photos I took in Houston pop up on the tour. Yes, it's probably the one I showed today, too. How these photos come up is that I actually, when I come to do these chats, I will do a search to see. I'll just sit Too Dark Park, Skinny Puppy, and see what shows up in images. And your picture comes up in images. Thank you very much for the use of your photo in the chat, Michael. Jason Hilton, years ago you told me that Convulsion was among the quickest tracks you wrote. It was like less than 2 hours, I'm gonna say. And then, as I said, I left it with Dwayne and he did the samples, the spoken word samples, but the majority of the song was written super quickly. I'm primary vocalist, use RX to strip vocals and Tormentor. Would you consider sharing instrumental versions? No, we can't do that. Even though I'm doing that on Patreon here now. If you decide you're going to go cut vocals to them, then that's your own plan. Convulsion. I want to cover this one. Okay, well, no, SY22, SY77. The samples I just showed you are from radio. I see that you're going into a lot of detail about the sample sources and stuff. I hope I've covered that previously here on the talk of the song. Drums on TD, mostly Yamaha. No Yamaha. None. Tormentor, I actually have said it's all Akai S900. Tormentor, again, the samples. Most of it, Tormentor, as I said, was ESQ. And the samples come from Dwayne as far as the spoken word stuff, but most of that Tormentor is not noise samples. Absolutely, Rash Reflection is more noise samples than any other component, as I showed you here earlier on the video. Years ago, I sampled some of your drums. Yeah, we sampled them from somewhere too. I recall almost every snare being comprised of one sound pan left, another one right. That's not true, actually. A lot of them are singular samples that were, say, from Thomas Dolby or, Yes. Not, maybe, I don't know. Sorry, I don't mean Yes, I mean Trevor Horn. And basically people of that ilk. They were sample heavy back in the day. You couldn't really mix samples as easily back then, and so we didn't really get into mixing until I believe we got the S1000. Back in the day, we'd sample its sound at C3. Yeah, that's pretty much what we do. But we'd give it, you know, maybe 3 or 4 semitones on either side of transposition that you could use so that in case you wanted to screw with like the pitch to see that it would work with something, you didn't have to just, you know, you could play with it quickly. Keeping in mind, this is a time when fans only had music to and art to go by. The TDP fold-out cover with lyrics was special because it provided image to coincide with the material. You know, I don't even think I have a TDP fold-out. I think that could be CD only, as far as I know. Sadly, someone had mentioned long ago that Dwayne was having difficulties with TDP. The only difficulties that he had is that if he had written an idea, such as Bark, that he didn't get the reaction from Ogre or from Ray in those days. He wanted them to be treated like, okay, this will be a song on the album. And I believe that there was another song that is featured here on my Patreon. If you look back and you'll I can't remember the name of it right now, but it was a demo from Too Dark Park that wasn't even worked on. And so Dwayne was pretty upset about, this is at the beginning of the time when Dwayne would start to become upset about whether or not an idea of his was actually going to be used. So though it would grow as now time will go on in Last Rites, more pure Dwayne songs will come into the picture, which is nice. But you know, his ideas were always somewhat kind of like overlooked in the sense because, I mean, they were different. They had a different sound, and basically right away, if there wasn't an immediate sort of acknowledgement that this was like on the regular realm of Skinny Puppy, that it wouldn't get used, it wouldn't get worked on. So that was where his frustration lied. James Earl, the liner notes say recorded spontaneously. Improvisation was a large part of what we did, and a large part of everything we did, as I said, including the creation of Spasmolytic, was created through the essence of improvisation. Reclamation is an improvisation. It is structured through samples, but there was no idea about how the song should be finished, so it basically became a cacophony. We're like, let's make the most cacophonous performance of a brap that we can with a live setting, so that it's performed the way we would on the stage. And, you know, much like how Walking on Ice is, much in the very same manner. Also, I own 4,000 albums, and the TDP is the one I've listened to the most. Thank you. Dash, there he is. The guy making the videos. Many live tracks. Too Dark Park Tour eventually made it to Rap 4. Does the rest of this recording exist? Yes, there are other live recordings from that era. I guess I'm just going to have to go through and see what's there and see what there is. But, you know, I wouldn't release them without, you know, seeing what everybody else thinks about it. So we'll see. Airsick Grove, no question that this is the one I borrowed from a friend when I was like in high school. I've been hooked ever since. Shoreline Poison's song I mentioned most. It's, you know, the middle section to me in Shoreline Poison is pretty special. It's very similar to a song Cursible, which will come along in the process, where it has the exact same formula. So if you like Shoreline Poison, you may also like Cursible. I'll call them like brother and sister songs. Joey Galvin, I absolutely love the artwork for this album. Certainly one of my favorites. It's cool that the vinyl cassette and CD each have a different cover. What made you decide to work with someone different? As I said earlier, Jim has always been a good friend, even friends with Steven. So basically we just knew that at some point along the way we wanted to work with Jim and see what will come. Epiphania. I have absolutely no clue how it's possible to achieve such a super dense and still transparent mix for a sample onslaught like Convulsion. Absolutely. If you listen to the samples I played you earlier, you wonder how a song ever got created out of that. Is there a lot of, if this comes up, that goes down sidechain compression? No. extreme EQing of every single sampler, or is it just playing by ear? It's all playing by ear. I mean, a large part of that stuff played out in the demo as it did, and it was just great EQing and great compression and great tracking by Rave that made it work. And yeah, how about once explained on YouTube that the whole voice distortion magic basically one specific overdriven preamp. I don't recall which one that would be. I mean, that was Rave's department, and Ken came in as the assistant engineer on this one, so he would probably know. There was no, I believe the Eventide original black harmonizer was also utilized in that chain. Alejo, hello Kevin. I think this album is a great kickstart to understand the '90s. Yeah, absolutely. Remember, as a teen was weird, and this album is really weird in the best way possible. One of the things that helps with that weirdness is it sounds a lot like a sound collage. Maybe you already answered this, but where you're trying to go back on early industrial. I don't think we were trying to do anything. I think we just were following our own sense about, like, you know, what we wanted to do. You know, where we wanted to take thing was always some weirdly natural. It wasn't like something we thought like, well, gee, let's try and make an industrial album, or let's make an album like this or something. It was just basically me and that guy. We just had a warped sense of, like, you know, what a sampler was and where it should go. And, you know, really that was really, you know, what it all was and why it went where you know, where it did. You know, just follow, like I say, follow your intuition, and don't make an album like anybody else. Like don't like say I'm gonna make an album like Ministry, or I'm gonna make an album like so and so, or an album like Skinny Puppy. Like, stick to your own, you know, your own vision. Or even if your vision like sucks, like you think it sucks, it might not suck to a lot of other people. Or even if you think it might be too much, like, go with it anyways. Alex, when I first heard Tormentor in my teens, I can still remember. I was sitting at my friend's house and it changed my course of life. I was stunned that this alien music was somehow made by human beings. It set me on a course to experience that same feeling of confusion and magic in music. What was a piece of music you heard that was similar, that had a similar effect on you, kickstarting a lifelong passion? Well, as I was reading that, I have to say, when David Bowie played Radioactivity, the album, before his show with the lights out, while he showed Salvador Dali's Un Chien de Loup, I had never heard Kraftwerk yet, and it completely changed my life at the age of 15, 1976. And I'll just never forget it. So the original version of Radioactivity is far better than the remix version that they keep on playing at the concerts. I wish that Kraftwerk would just play the original version. So anyways, that was my Tormentor. I always loved the album title. Could you elaborate? Too Dark Park, as I said, it's Stanley Park. And someone said, boy, this album's sounding really dark. I said, yeah, it's a too dark park, like a playground. Something like that. What do you think the most Dwayne track on TDP is? Well, it has to be Spasmolytic as far as the album is concerned, because that is the Dwayne creation from its inception. Also, Bark is a total Dwayne vibe. Also, Reclamation. So those three, you can say Dwayne are those are three classic Dwayne songs. TFWO was a very classic collab between me and him. It's the most collab-y as far as, like, where musically it comes and goes. Like, some of those changes in the end are pure Dwayne. Like, dun 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 dun. Just the beauty of how the drums skip. That's when I really start to realize that, man, this Dwayne is just such an amazing programmer and such, you know, so intuitive, and, you know, best partner ever in the world that anyone could ever ask for. Let's see. Love the string melodies on Shoreline, Poison, Morpheus. Just, well, okay, first of all, you know, you come up with this structure, and then you come up with a section that feels right. And then for me, the strings always either came first or last. So I'd either come up with a bass line first or the strings first and play a section and then play everything around that. But for me, as I said, Shoreline was a song that started in my apartment, finished in Mushroom Studios. It's very special for all the components that were made from noise. Morpheus Laughing is an apartment song. It's probably my most special song, Kevin's song on Too Dark Park. And as I said, when I learn that song and play it live, it gives me goosebumps. One of the few. Can you speculate as to what the lyric 97 Cars and Free Love is about? Yes. As we said earlier we were talking about the Rash niche, that was what he had, 97 cars and free love. And that was all about Phil's, the Green Guy's experience about being part of the cult. Yes, sirree. Thanks again. I absolutely love Too Dark Park. Changed my life. Thank you so much for your support. Aaron, amazing album start to finish, almost consistent, iconic. Skinny Puppy ever made one album, and this was it. They would still be my favorite band. Oh, thanks. Would it ever be possible to release demo versions? I have been here on Patreon. You guys need to look back in the history. Modular Reaper Image. Wrote TDP from a friend a long time ago, my introduction to this genre. A lot of people, it seems that, Rolling Stone and all these people always pick like Too Dark Park as one of the most industrial albums ever made. And I'm thinking like, is it? Is it really? If it is, then great. I just didn't think. I thought always like, Vivisect was maybe more industrial, but I don't know. Could be true. Could I comment on the drum production? Well, I think that's what sets Skinny Puppy aside from our counterparts is, when we first got into making music, 99% of the reason is that we wanted to make some bombastic sounding drums. And I mean like bombastic, so that basically they would just hit you like you hadn't heard yet. Because a large part of our take on industrial music was small machines, small sounds, scary but small. So the idea was to build up these things into big scary things, and then a sampler gave us the tools to do it. Joel Mayer, this is by far my favorite Skinny Puppy album. I'm looking forward to this chat. Any chance of getting this or any Skinny Puppy album mix for 5-1? I highly doubt it. And the reason is because the master tapes for Too Dark Park may possibly exist somewhere, but how we used to record back then is we used to track like the live components, vocals, effects, things like that. And for the most part, we wouldn't track the things that were coming from the instruments because we would run them live. We'd run them live from the instruments as we mixed. You can see that pretty clearly in the Hex on X video where it pans back and shows you the Pro 24 playing along, as showing that we're playing the samples as not to just all 2-inch. So if we go back and review what's on the recordings, all those classic parts in a lot of cases are not put on tape. And that was because we only had 24 tracks. So if we put there the kick, the snare, the mix, the black, the hat, the bass, the this, the that, we quickly come up with 24 tracks. So that's why that was decided. And, on hindsight, for remixes and stuff like that, it would have been great to make it the other way. But we didn't. As far as I know, that's the way it is. Thanks for your question. Larry, did Dwayne acquire the K2000 by this point? Not yet. I believe the K2000 comes about, for sure, for the process. I don't even think the K2000 was there yet on Last Rites. I am pretty certain. I will look into that before the Last Rites chat, though, and give you specific information on that. But as said by Dwayne did say that when the K2000 did come out, that he thought it was the best keyboard ever invented. And when Dwayne died, he never told me of any other keyboard that he thought was better than the K2000. So let's go on record at saying that Dwayne was the master of many samplers, but his be-end all instrument was the Kurzweil K2000. Die by Night, thank you for going through all your albums and answering questions. Question, you've talked about the process for making background sample beds that percussion and bass are added to. Would you arrange, edit samples, quantize? Well, I think I've showed you earlier here about how fragments of things would be hand sequenced like drum tracks to be put together to create the basis of what would become the idea of the song. And then if needed, drums were then added also, S900, bass would be added, all the rest of the things to frame up what that idea was. Hope that gives you a good picture of what that is. Rash Mix, this is one of my top 5 albums of all time. Is there any good footage from the tour? Yes, I just showed that. That's the only footage, believe it or not, that we have that's that good. There are some fairly decent bootlegs. Of course, I think I may have them. That Intolerance bootleg that got released, I'm fairly certain that was released by a corrupt ex-manager of ours that stole that DAT out of the box that I have of the DATs of the shows. It's the only one that's missing, ironically. And so he would have been the only one to have access to that and to create that Intolerance bootleg. It makes perfect sense. Also, do you happen to know what synth Dwayne used for that lead solo on Dog Shit from the tour? As we showed, he did have the Prophet 5 by this time. And for the tour, I mean, I'm not too certain what synthesizers he had. Dwayne typically would do different sounds than what were on the album completely. So if you witnessed the live show and we played Dog Shit, he wouldn't play any of the sounds that were from the album. He'd play a whole new sound. So I'm like not too sure what that would be. That will go down in mystery. Brett, this album took a few goes from here to here through the layers. To me, it's not only the peak skinny puppet, but also peak industrial. The album of variance between bars and music is astounding. I imagine difficult given the limitations of technology. How did you and Dwayne keep focus and follow your vision through to the end? You know, what's really weird is that we had this natural relationship that I just used to feel that we were on a course that I didn't want to question. It wasn't like, you know, it had like it wasn't like it confused me in any way. It was like, this is okay, I'm gonna make effort, gonna do this, make these sounds, come with the thing, and here's my idea. So it was like not like too confusing to me. It was more like, actually, I hope that everybody else digs this idea because I'm kind of digging it for what it is. And I like the idea that it was made out of noise, and I've always loved the idea of sampling from the radio. I actually think that, you know, I should probably go back to doing that, but I think that because it was a natural course at the time and just doing it naturally, I think going back may be semi-derivative, but nevertheless, because that's something that I had fun doing, I might do it for the fun of it.
Aren't you going to add a radio to your
live rig?
Yeah, your live rig, right?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. Yes. Zach again. Hey, Kevin, as usual, some tech questions. What was your guitar setup? I just had a basic guitar, and I used those heavy metal and the Distortion Plus. It's funny, I bought my guitar off this guy named Les, and it's an old Fender Telecaster with a Strat neck. And then I found out some years later from T-Dog, the world's #1 guitar tech who did a chat here, that he said, this guitar is worth bucks. And I'm like, really odd, but I've treated it like so poorly with files and all sorts of things on the strings. But needless to say, it's held up very well. And T-Dog restored it into its beauty. So I still have the main guitar. I used to use Rave's guitar for a lot of guitar parts because he got a guitar from the guy from April Wine. And it was a Gibson SG, a beautiful Gibson SG. And that thing used to sustain like no other guitar. If you've got some feedback on that thing, it would just sound beautiful. And so, yeah, that was a beautiful guitar. Even toured with that guitar. I think I broke one of the things off it, and then Rave took it away from me. Sorry, Rave, breaking the guitar. Didn't mean to, of course. We're using pedals and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I mentioned that earlier. He's seeing monsters. Yeah, we've explained where that came from. Rash Reflection that kicks in. Everything in Rash Reflection is samples, like even that violin part, all that thing, like the essence of the coolness of what I feel is in that song is all from the radio. And it's funny that people will say, well, is this SY77 or K2000? We didn't have it yet. Reclamation is Watership Down and Hellbound Hellraiser. I think I've answered more detail on that song earlier. Lee Newton, hi Kevin, thanks as always. Illuminating discussions. Too Dark Park was one of my first Skinny Puppy albums I heard. Never forget the moment when I pressed the cassette for the first time. Everyone got the cassette. Popped it out of the player. Oh, they thought the tape was being eaten. I mean, that'd be a good analogy. My question, would you say that there was an influence from the growing popularity of extreme metal that crept into themes on this album? No, not really. Even though, we used to at times listen to some metal, like Morbid Angel or what were those guys? Wasp. We'd listen to them more for fun, not really like. I used to love how fast the double kick drum playing was on some tracks, and I thought this is as a drummer that was like really intriguing me. But I'm glad we never became a metal band. I mean, in some ways, there's some parts of us that are part metal. I mean, Tin Omen or whatever like that. But, basically, we tried to steer away from it. Yeah. Shannon, hey, what was the story behind Grave Wisdom? I think we just talked about that here. Is the bicycling postman character from Belladonna in the Spasmolytic video at all inspired by the father character in the Popeye movie You Owe Me an Apology? You'd have to ask Jim that. He is the one that wrote the script for You Owe Me an Apology, and also was the one that I guess brought the costume, because I definitely didn't get it. Second, did you hang on to any of the cardboard promo? I sure did. I believe we even had a couple of these for sale in the shop.
We did.
But no longer.
They sold out real fast.
They sold out like within a few seconds, and this was quite a few years back. Yeah, they're cool. They're like, I think they were the only promotional item from Too Dark Park, as far as I know. Any fun behind the scenes stories about making Spasmolytic video? Fun? Well, I got to ride a bike, and for me, like riding a bike was always like at that time in my life, that was my most favorite thing to do. Skinny Puppy, if you can believe it, when we used to go to and from the studio to do our recording, we didn't show up in cars. We always showed up on our mountain bikes. And so from where we lived downtown to Mushroom Studios meant that we always had to ride our bike down Granville Street, across the Granville Street Bridge, and take that nice 6th Street exit that's a circular little thing, swing down there, and swing up into Mushroom Studios. And then when the session would be finished at 4 o'clock in the morning, we would hit the road once again after the session, bombing back up onto the Granville Street Bridge, back down Granville, which isn't the safest thing. That is like, it's almost a freeway at that speed on the bridge. And so there would be us. But that was what you would have seen in 1990. You would have seen us, big group, me, Rave, Dwayne, usually the trio of us, Ken as well. We'd be all on our bikes, just back and forth, everywhere. And we would stop for breaks and go for rides through Stanley Park as well. So that's why a lot of it was, park related. Nick, love to hear about your drumming style. You seem to have a unique way of drumming. Spasmolytic, as I said, was everything that I could do in one song. It was probably, as I said, the toughest track I ever laid down. And as I said, I talked about Bonhams earlier. You should go back and review what I said about Spasmolytic there. But any chance you'd ever do a Sunday chat demonstrating how you drum? I did do a Sunday chat talking all about my drum history, if you go back and look. And it does talk a bit about it. Did you drum on Rash Reflection or program those drums? They are like the sound, as I showed you earlier, that's like, it's like a bum bum type of sample, and then as well like programmed drums on top of that, which is all the crazy snare fills. Programmed all that by hand. Morpheus Laughing is a wonderfully dark symphonic track. Was this a Dwayne track? No, this is a Kevin one. The pads and bass make me think of him. Yeah, well, I guess we were both mutually inspired, but yeah, no, it's a purely Kevin track. I love how sparse the bass is used on this track. It was probably my favorite song of the album. A lot of ESQ. The percussive sound was a sample, a set of samples from on the S900. As I said, it's not really a dance song, but it's weird that I hear that people play it in dance club. On that note, I heard Grave Wisdom played at a club a couple weeks ago. It was awesome. Yeah, I've explained that earlier. What sensor bass was used on Spasmolytic? It was all the Emax, and the Emax and the Emax 2. There is also ESQ on that, and as well Mirage. And at that time, we didn't have the Mini Moog in the studio, so basically it was all samples. Be lucky if there was one analog synth on that entire album. Actually, it's all digital. Let's see here. A lot of sound in a short amount of space. Was this a conscious decision to make this album super dense? No, just that's how the songs turned out. And it's a miracle that actually all you guys liked it. I mean, that's what I always think. It's like, you know, it's dense and it's sonically what it is. But I guess we just kind of fluked out in the sense that the songs ended up being what they are. You know, I mean, there's no way we could have told at the time that Convulsion would turn into a song that, you know, would be a song that any of us like. We like it, but we don't know if you liked it. And we started making music at that point for that purpose. We didn't care if anyone liked it. And to us, that was, you know, the most punk rock approach. I think a lot of us feel this album is a masterpiece. It almost feels like you, Dwayne, and Ogre were unleashed, and yet this album has a focused chaos approach. What do you equate as the reasons for it sounding so groundbreaking and unique? I have to say, it's because it didn't sound like another album we had heard. I know that, like, at that point, I was merely following the cue of where the song would lead me. So for me, the idea of making a song out of crazy noise and stuff like that, and then making a rhythm out of that, and then sequencing that, I think it all stems back to when Gary Wright first said to me, when he first told me about samplers, and I had never heard of one yet, he said, yeah, you can use a basketball as a kick drum. And I thought, like, that's a great idea. And so I've always had this idea to make an album out of samples that, you know, were unusual or different. And I think it came, you know, really came to be, and probably mostly in this album. I mean, Vivisect is the same. It's largely sample-based album that's just like, sort of like the same approach with noise. Last Right's even more so. I wouldn't say even more so, but just as much as. So we'll talk about that when we get to the Last Rights chat. Thank you for your drumming on this album. I love it. Well, thank you for the compliment. My dream would be if you, SP, did what Peter Murphy did and do a residence. I don't know about that. You got a tour coming up. That's what we call Skinny Puppy. In past talks, you mentioned numerous happy accidents with playing a radio dial. So I've always been curious, in that chorus for Shoreline Poison, that distorted, or is that a sample? Yes, you saw it earlier here in the chat. Man, that sample blows my mind too, because it really just has that vibe. Joe Gonzalez, Too Dark Park blew my mind with some of the most distorted drums I'd ever heard at the time. What was your go-to distortion process for the drums? It was barely anything more than those two pedals and maybe some natural distortion that would occur on the EQs, or on a preamp. But I know that Ray was also using crossovers previously with drum machines. So there could have been some treatment on the kick and the snare that would bring out just more radical elements. I know that that was the main component of our importance of mixing was the kicks and snares and bass and making sure that those things literally were, capable of bringing down a building. That, that was really the whole point. Mark 13, again, thanks for the album breakdowns. I'm sure you answer most of the questions. Love Convulsion as an opener with its shuffle groove. Last you would expect for such a heavy song. Always left our Shoreline Poison is primarily concentrated on heavy drums till you reach halfway through. Yeah, that's a Kevin concept is followed through, as I said, on Cursible as well, where basically I just loved when music would come and then go away, go back to the noise. And quite commonly, these middle breaks always end up, because they're short, they end up becoming something that I just find that's what draws me in. What was the inspiration and thought process behind the Spasmolytic music video? Gee, I think we've covered that one. Yeah. What did you have to eat for dinner on July 20th, 1989? Chicken biryani. What synth was the bass on Nature's Revenge? It was Emax sampled bass. And as I said, Dwayne was the master of creating disc after disc after disc of all these classic samples that you could come along and that's where a lot of my inspiration came from. Is I would come along and listen to some classic samples that Dwayne took of a clean bass synth, and I'd be like, damn, this sounds good, and just start playing. And then, okay, what tempo was that? Oh yeah, then beep, 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 boom, 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 boom. Let's get it in there, and then just track from there. Not TDP, but I love fresh bread sample on Anger. Yeah, me too. That's the greatness of just like the randomness of radio. I purchased an ESQ after I first heard it was responsible for the tones on Grave Wisdom. It is, yeah. My favorite Skinny Puppy song. This album changed my whole trajectory musically, something for which I will be ever grateful. Thanks, Anthony. Hope you guys appreciated that song at Doomsday. I'd really like to twist people's arms, and maybe we can do that song again one day. For the Spasmolytic remix, how did you guys put bits of Rash reflection in the end? Anything goes in those days as far as remix is concerned. Josh, it was just a basic, like, when you enter the studio and you were thinking about how, you're going to take a remix. I think remixes in those days used to have, like, more, people had more imagination. People had, like, the idea that they would be, they're going to make a statement with a remix. And that was more like it. Wow, we got a lot of viewers today. 278 current viewers.
There was more.
That's crazy. I'd like to thank you guys for dropping in here and sharing this experience today with me. Don't forget that I am on Patreon, and this is where these chats are typically made. They're not typically public. They're typically private on Patreon, and they are archived there. This is something that I believe that we're up to 206 live chats. So there's a lot of material there to go back if you're interested in any particular album. I've also been doing this in chronological order. So I started off with Back and Forth, went on to Remission, Bites, Mind, and so on and so on. And I've tackled now the 3 side projects we did before Too Dark Park, and continue on this way. I will say, guys, next Friday is the first day of full rehearsals for Skinny Puppy for the tour coming up. Yes, we have all been rehearsing on our own, in our own environments, in our own setups, But we come together next Friday for the first time again that myself, Matthew, Justin, and Ogre shall play together again for the first time since 2017. I will add that it's the first time I probably will have been seeing Ogre since 2017. So it'll be interesting and should be fun. And I hope that a lot of you can make it to the tour and you got yourself set up with decent price tickets and didn't get like caught up in any of this Ticketmaster shit or whatever. But just if you guys are in the VIP, I'll yell hello to you from stage and maybe I'll throw some gum at you. Try and throw something at you. Maybe I'll find something to throw. But if you guys want to support what's going on here, join the Patreon, and I will be doing live chats from select cities on the tour, as well as reviews of some of the shows and talk about detail, as well as filming some aspects of the tour and letting you see it there. So if you're interested in this, go check out my Patreon and join up there. I see that we're actually approaching 900 people, which I cannot barely believe. Okay, well, that's awesome. All you guys on the side here, David Pratt, Jessica, Better and Better, Guy Hamster, Dogbot, Winter Nightmare, Skuska, Eric Peterson, Dre, Alan Yeager. Look at Alan Yeager's here. Big up Alan Yeager. You know that Alan has just finished the new sleeve design for the new Cyberactive album. Pretty excited about that.
It's killer.
It's killer too. Joe Virus, I see you out there. Joe Virus, big up Joe. Airsick Grove, Dash. Where's my European contingency? I don't see you, Gurno. I see some of you are probably out there, but big up to all you. Oscar Ramirez, Rihanna, even you're in there.
Hi.
Hi there, Rihanna. Tiger Lily. Got to make sure that Tiger Lily says hi today. I mean, I can't be certain that we will have rehearsal footage. Rehearsals is when we're getting all of our things all wired, everything together, and by the time we hit the stage, we will be ready to expose you to. Well, I've been rehearsing since the beginning of February, and I'm telling you, that's some sore fingers already.
And it's a good set.
You like the set?
I've heard it way too many times, but it's great.
Ira, hello. I'm glad you could tune in. We miss you guys. Tiger Lily, there. No Highwatt on this tour. Nope, he's gone. He doesn't speak to us anymore. We have no idea why. And I think that's been talked about in the chats too. However, he still does remixes on his channel, so tune into him there. And I'm really looking forward to the whole sort of like, you gear up for something to make a tour. We started, believe it or not, in 2019 with the tour idea and the concept of making the set list. And basically, because of COVID, we have been making progress, and then it'd be stopped, be canceled, or progress, whatever. And so to finally now have this coming together, it seems like, obviously the culmination of 3 years of study and work. My setup has been set up that I rehearse in for 3 years. It's like, okay, finally, I've also had a chance to completely rebuild it. So it's great to also be able to rebuild your gear and have it be like, it's not all old gear. I was a little bit worried about going out and touring with some old. I do tour with old gear. Don't get me wrong. I'm saying like the way, our technical side of things is run. We had to update that system. That's right. Mark Walk does not tour. Mark Walk is currently taking care of his family. Sweet guy that he is. The elderly. And that's where he's at in his world. I will say, currently, no, there is no new album in the works for Skinny Puppy. However, this tour is something that we're focusing a lot of energy on, and we're putting everything that we can into making this effort for Skinny Puppy be the best that it can be. So, you guys, I'd like to thank you all for joining me here on the chat today. Databomb, thanks for your help on the side there, moderating, and Skuska for that. Join me here again soon for another live chat. And in the meantime, best to you all, you guys out there. Thanks, Rihanna, for all you do. Thanks, Tiger Lily, Connie Roberts, and we'll see you guys soon.